Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ABB Optical Group Practice Development Educational Series. We're so pleased that you would take time out of your busy lives to be able to attend tonight's presentation, one that I think you'll find extremely interesting. Now, our speaker for this evening is someone that many of you may know, Dr. Tom Quinn. Tom is from Athens, Ohio. For those of you that have not met or heard Tom before, you're in for a real big treat. Tom is an unbelievable speaker and an extremely knowledgeable clinician and communicator, and I think that you'll find this evening's presentation really quite excellent because of what Tom brings to the table. You can see from the biographical sketch of him, he's done it all. He has been politically involved in the organizational aspects of optometry and has reached the highest levels of both the Contact Lens and Cornea Section Council and being a diplomate in the cornea contact lens and refractive technologies for the Academy of Optometry. He's an advisor to lots of different things, not the least of which is to the Gas Permeable Lens Institute, and has been deeply involved in the East-West Eye Conference. And then along with his wife, Susan, they are co-administrators for Vision Source. Besides being an extremely active private practice in the Athens, Ohio area, he also serves as an associate professor of clinical practice at Ohio State and a clinical assistant professor for the Ohio University College of Medicine. With that, I would really like to welcome Dr. Tom Quinn. And Tom, thank you so much for being around tonight and participating. We're really looking forward to seeing what you have to say about us getting the most out of presbyopic contact lens options today.
Craig, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for all of you out there for tuning in tonight. I think we're going to have some fun. Hopefully we can share a few ideas that you find helpful you can take into the practice tomorrow and utilize. I want to start with disclosures. I try to play well with everybody, so when I present something on a topic such as what we're going to discuss tonight, there's no bias involved, because my goal is to meet the patient's needs as best I can, and I'm going to employ all the tools available in order to meet that goal. I want to take just a second before we talk about presbyopic contact lens correction and discuss the people that we're fitting with presbyopic contact lens correction, because really kind of two different groups out there that we would be interfacing with. The Gen Xers are very tech savvy, and I think the thing that really helps drive success for Gen Xers is they tend to be very adaptable in their nature. And if we keep that in mind as we discuss things here tonight, we're going to realize adaptation is an important piece of the puzzle for most presbyopic contact lens wearers to be successful. Baby boomers have a little different skill set, but what really drives their interest in contact lens correction is the desire to stay active. And we all recognize the freedom that contact lenses can provide to us and help baby boomers as well as everyone with their level of activity. So I just a little brief introduction, and they both benefit from being rid of spectacles and taking advantage of contact lenses. Right off the bat, I want to address the issue of, well, is it multifocals or monovision? Which is the best approach to take when to meet the needs of the presbyopic patient? And I'm not going to give you my opinion. I'm going to let science speak. And I will share with you here a few studies, but study after study after study show that when put head to head against monovision, multifocals win 7 to 8 times out of 10. The last study you see there by Woods in 2015, there wasn't quite as high a preference for multifocals, but it's because there was a population that didn't like either. So it wasn't that there was a greater preference for monovision. It was just that overall dissatisfaction. I think a lot of that comes from setting the wrong bar of expectation. So we're going to talk about that. In fact, in terms of expectation, there's patient expectations, but then there's also tends to be an attitude among practitioners and fitters that they have not had good experience with multifocal contact lens correction, And I think it comes down to a few things, but two in particular that I want to touch on right now. One is those same studies that showed 7 out of 10 people prefer multifocals over monovision. Those very same studies showed that with near vision and low light, that's a challenge with multifocals. So rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, what we can say is, okay, well, overall, people prefer a multifocal contact lens, but when they're in a dimly lit restaurant and struggling to see the menu, let's arm them, first of all, in advance with the information that this is going to potentially be an issue, and arm them with the tool to manage it. What tools can we use to manage it? Magnification, light. So you can have apps on your phone, but generally just using the light on your cell phone, which everyone has in their pocket now, helps patients get over that. It's the no surprise approach is what's important here. So we prepare them for this issue ahead of time so then they're not frustrated by it. Prepare them for this situation and give them the tools to manage it. That takes that issue off the table. The other challenge, I think, is setting the right expectation in practitioners' minds. Sometimes practitioners think multifocals aren't successful when acuity measurements aren't what they hope that they would be. So Jill Woods did a great study looking at objective testing like acuity measurements, but also looked at subjective ratings. When she looked at objective testing, monovision did perform better than multifocals. But subjective ratings, asking patients, which did you prefer for your daily activities like night driving, watching television, working on the computer? Now multifocals shine. And isn't that what we really want to do, is help people do what they do all day, every day? Multifocals are the way to go. So we got science backing us up on approaching the presbyopic patient with a multifocal. So when we are interfacing with a patient and we recommend multifocals, we can do it with confidence because science backs us up. So then once we have this frame of mind, there's a lot of different tools out there in the multifocal sphere. What are the decision drivers to help guide us to choosing the proper tool? And I would say the biggest driver for me is astigmatic error. Where's the flinch level? How much astigmatism is meaningful in terms of affecting the performance of a multifocal lens? This is a table out of a great study that Catherine Richdale published back in 2007, looking at astigmatism and the impact of uncorrected astigmatism on visual performance. And she found as little as a diopter of uncorrected astigmatism can cause a reduction of acuity of one line of acuity under mesopic conditions. So although patients under bright light may read the chart pretty well with residual astigmatism, when they leave work at night and driving home at dusk or driving into work at dawn, their visual acuity is significantly compromised. So based on that, I've laid my mark in the sand that 3/4 of a diopter of astigmatism and more is unacceptable. We need to do something to correct for the astigmatic component as well as correct for presbyopia. And the prevalence is significant, and there's a lot of data on this slide, but look at the top line. In at least one eye, nearly 50% of the population has at least 3/4 of a diopter of astigmatism. So it's something we're going to have to deal with on a regular basis if we're going to meet the needs of the presbyopic patient. We'll talk about how to deal with it here in just a minute. I also want to share the statistics that the prevalence of astigmatism increases with age, as well as the amount of astigmatism increases with age, as well as the position of the astigmatism shifts more to against the rule. So we're more likely to have scenarios where the corneal shape doesn't completely speak to the spectacle cylinder. So in other words, they may not match. So that's the next thing I look at. I want to look at the astigmatic component, See if it's 3/4 of a diopter or more. I'm particularly interested in that if it's in the low spherical error, dominant eye, and against the rural axis. And then the next key question, is it corneal? Is it all corneal astigmatism? If it's not, my first option tends to be a toric soft option. Toric single vision soft for far away with readers over. You know, Census Bureau data suggests that the presbyopia today is among the most active ever recorded. And so when we do soft distance with readers over, I think oftentimes we're not doing as well as we could because they're burdened by the need for the readers. Other options are monovision, which can be successful. Sometimes, as we talked about on the earlier slide, it's just one eye that's astigmatic. So maybe we do a single vision toric on that eye and multifocal on the other eye, or a toric multifocal soft lens. Let's take just a second and talk about toric multifocal soft lenses. There's a lot of benefits. You can get them in virtually any power and any shape and any size with today's custom lenses. So we can really customize the designs that we want, and that customization allows us to provide a lens that performs at a higher level. Of course, there's challenges to that too. Currently, we're limited to lenses that cannot be replaced on a daily basis, and daily wear has been shown to be the safest option. By daily wear, I mean daily disposable. So we're going to require patients to take proper care of lenses if they're using their lenses on a re-wearable basis, which can be a challenge. And there's a limited diagnostic fitting set. So that means we're basing our order on a calculation, and that can slow the process down. I have a few ideas that I found really helpful in helping move along soft toric multifocal fitting. My first tip is, when fitting soft toric multifocals, before you start nuancing any presbyopic correction, make sure the astigmatism correction is proper first. So for example, if the lens rotates on the eye, make that axis adjustment before trying to nuance any presbyopic correction. One way to help expedite this process, and I do this every time I fit a soft toric custom design, multifocal design, I order 3 diagnostic lenses per eye right at the outset. I order a pair that are where the axis is right on the spectacle axis, and then I order a pair on one side of that axis and then a pair on the opposite side of that axis. So that begs the question, well, what axes do you order? How far do you go off the spectacle axis when you're doing your straddling? And that depends on a few things. And let me back up and just say, let's assume that 3/4 of a diopter of astigmatism or more is what we've determined is unacceptable. How much axis mislocation of a given toric lens will induce 3/4 of a diopter residual astigmatism? How much is induced is dependent on how much astigmatism correction is in the lens. If we have 30 degrees of axis mislocation, the amount of residual astigmatism is going to be equal to the toric power in the lens. Let me say that again. If we have 30 degrees or 1 clock hour of mislocation of the axis, that's going to introduce a residual astigmatism that's equal to the toric power in the lens. Let me give you an example. So let's say we have a lens of a cylinder power of -2 1/4. So it's some sphere power, -1 1/2, let's say, with 2 1/4 cylinder at some axis. If that lens rotates 30 degrees off axis, it's going to introduce 2 1/4 diopters of residual astigmatism. That is the same power that's in the contact lens. Usually lenses don't rotate that much, right? So if you say, well, maybe more realistically, a lens would rotate 10 degrees off alignment, in which case that's 1/3 of 30 degrees. So 1/3 of 2 1/4 diopters of power that's in the contact lens will be residual, which is our flinch level of 3/4 of a diopter residual astigmatism. So if I have a patient who has 2 1/4 diopter power, cylinder power in the contact lens, I'm going to order it on axis, which in the case of this example was at axis 90, and then I'm going to order it 10 degrees on either side of that, because once it gets to 10 degrees, it's going to introduce 3/4 of a diopter residual cylinder. This next chart is one that I calculated with my old optics professor in optometry school, Dr. Bill Brown, who's now at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He and I got together and we calculated based on, you'll see in the left column there, the different potential toric lens powers. And if they rotate off the degrees on the right there, they will introduce 3/4 of a diopter residual astigmatism. So that guides you into selecting what those 2 other axes are going to be when you order your initial 3 lenses. Because if you put a lens on, you custom ordered it, custom designed it, you order it, and you put it on, it rotates, and you only have that 1 pair, you have to order another pair, and it just really drags out the process. While you're ordering 3, you're ready for the lens to rotate either way with a second replacement. If corneal astigmatism equals spectacle astigmatism, we have a little dance party, because it opens up a whole multitude of multifocal options, because we can take advantage of rigid optics along the line of sight. So toric softs obviously are still an option, but hybrid multifocals and gas perm multifocals, both corneal and scleral, are possibilities, because that tear lens will correct for the residual, for the astigmatism. So which of these, so it's great to have a lot of options, but now we have to choose which option is the best. And the second thing that I consider, aside from astigmatic error, is what's the patient accustomed to wearing? If they're accustomed to wearing a corneal single vision gas perm lens, I'm going to stay with a corneal lens and throw a multifocal in there. If they're accustomed to wearing a soft toric, I may stay with a soft toric if they're happy. Oftentimes, I've also taken soft toric patients and transitioned them into a hybrid design, because it's a fairly easy transition from a soft into a hybrid design, where we have a soft skirt and a rigid center, taking advantage of the comfort of the soft skirt and the optics of the rigid center. The Duet Progressive is a center near design that's been with us for a while, comes available in 3 ads. The recently added to the armamentarium is a center distance duet design. And the center distance duet design comes in a variety of distance zone sizes, as you can see there at the top. Also quite a variety of add powers. Now, I think part of this flexibility is thinking ahead that maybe this design could be employed with a myopia management, myopia control, but it can also be quite effective in use as a multifocal correction for presbyopia. So a couple quick hints on hybrid fitting. You want to make sure that the rigid portion of the lens bridges over the cornea by about 1/2 or 3/4 of a diopter. You want the soft skirt to be as flat as possible, not so flat that you get edge lift or edge fluting, because then comfort will be compromised, and not so flat that the lens decenters, because as we will talk in more detail here, any multifocal lens has to center properly in order to perform as expected. And of course, more recently, this is actually a cover from the 2015 contact lens spectrum. Scleral multifocals are available, and this is an article that Melissa Barnett wrote, and these were some of the multifocal options in sclerals back in 2015. They've only grown and become even more readily available option. The things that I consider when I think about a scleral multifocal, first of all, most of them are center near, not all of them, most of them are. Key considerations are how big to make the ad, how strong to make the ad, and now we actually have the option in some designs to dictate where we place the ad. The other thing that really helps drive my thinking with scleral multifocals, if I'm fitting a scleral because of a highly irregular cornea, for example, a keratoconic eye, if there are a lot of high order aberrations being induced in the system for that reason, so that, for example, even with the scleral lens, my best corrected acuity is 20/40 or something in that range, I'd be hesitant to move them into a multifocal design. But if I have a good distance acuity with the scleral lens and a fairly low ad, I've had really good success in fitting those patients with scleral multifocals. Any questions before we get into more specifics in fitting specific designs?
So, Tom, a couple of things here. One is, I'm going to begin by apologizing that I failed to mention to the audience tonight that on your dashboard, about 3/4 of the way down, there is a questions box. Luckily, there are some veteran webinar goers that know this and have already given us some questions. But for those of you that did not notice that there is that questions box, if you have anything for the remaining of tonight's presentation, please click on that box, type in your question, and we will attempt to get to it.
Yeah.
So Tom, I want to lead with one that I think is kind of basic, but it is confusing for people. You are talking about, the question is, you're talking about multifocals.
Right.
And in soft lenses, when you say multifocal and bifocal, are those interchangeable terms for you?
Okay, so bifocal to me means there are two different powers, one for distance, one for near, while multifocal suggests to me there are more than two different powers. So most soft multifocals are aspheric designs. There are a few annular designs, but most of them are aspheric designs. So I think multifocal is a better descriptor because multiple points of focus are employed.
Okay, excellent. And I think it's possible that the person asking the question is thinking, when you do hear this aspheric optics, even though there's only two zones on the lens, is that a bifocal or a multifocal? But you sure answered that really quite well. The second one is, do you ever think in terms of using spherical equivalent, or are you always focused on the astigmatic correction, as you mentioned?
Great question. So there's been some work done actually quite a while ago. Chris Snyder and David Talley did a study looking at masking astigmatism with spherical lenses. Mm-hmm. And really the bottom line is it wasn't very effective. So if you have residual astigmatism and you're throwing multifocal optics on top of that, I think it can be a real game changer and sink the ship before it really gets sailing.
Okay, so there's just too much optical confusion going on there to make it viable.
Right.
Okay, and then just one last question before we proceed. And once again, those of you in the audience that would like to type in anything, please do it in the questions box. You mentioned that you typically like to order 3 diagnostic lenses per eye if you don't have those lenses in the office. Do the manufacturers have any issues with that, or is that not a problem?
Let me first of all clarify that that's only when I'm fitting a toric multifocal. So if it's just a standard multifocal, spherical multifocal, I wouldn't order 3 different designs, or 3 different lenses. Manufacturers, I've not gotten any kickback at all from them because it allows me to get to where I want to go more quickly, and then we have a successful, happy patient, and they're more likely to proceed with contact lens correction. Where if I'm ordering one at a time, it gets drawn out, they get discouraged, and ultimately may fail just due to the frustration.
Okay, great. And I think you make a strong case for it, the way that you're talking in terms of rotation and what that visual impact is and how it is inducing a residual astigmatic component. We did get a couple more questions in, but I think, Tom, why don't we go ahead and we will circle back and answer those also in the next Q&A session. Great.
These next 2 sections are what I'm really excited about. We're going to talk about tips on how to examine and fit and examine and heightened performance of multifocal lenses. And I want to take just a second, if the audience will allow me, to talk about translating designs. I think translating designs tend to be overlooked, and maybe we should stop and give them a little shout out because they have exceptional visual performance. And I think one of the key challenges or key hurdles that stop people from fitting translating lenses is, where do I put the seg line? And you can see in this video that the seg line is too high, and you can see in this video that the seg line is too low. So how can we get the seg line at least close to where we want it? And I got this from a manufacturer many years ago. If the goal is to put the seg line just below the lower pupillary margin, if you start by putting the seg line 1 millimeter below the geometrical center of the lens, you almost always be right there. Now, let me explain what I mean by 1 millimeter below the geometrical center of the lens. If we have a lens that's 10 millimeters in diameter, the geometrical center is at 5, go 1 millimeter below that, order a seg line at 4 millimeters, and if that lower lid is tangent to the lower limbus, which in most people it is, that seg line is going to be just about where you want it. I have a question for you. What about the seg position in this picture? Too high, too low, or just about right? Many people will say it's too low, and it may be, but I've seen patients like this be successful. So what I'd encourage you to do, if you decide to take my advice and fit patients that have really high visual demands with a segmented lens, and you put a lens on like this, give them something to read, teach them to keep their chin up, and have them hold a piece of reading material and see if they can view it at a comfortable angle. If they can't, if they have to hold the reading material down too low, obviously reorder the lens. But you don't need complete pupillary coverage with the ad in order for this lens to perform. So oftentimes the lens can look a little low but still perform. So always test it before you reorder it. The second reason people tend not to fit translating designs is that a lot of patients today work at the intermediate distance. We have a couple different strategies to help. We have trifocals that are now available. We have progressive translating designs. And here you can see little dots out at the edge, and you kind of draw an imaginary line to tell you where the seg line is. I've had really good success with these lenses. This is a creative option. This is a patient of mine whose father was an optometrist in Chicago. And she said, you can talk about me as long as you give my dad a shout out, which I've done at the bottom of the slide. She is an English professor, and she has bifocal translating lenses, distance at the top, near at the bottom. She puts these on. These are plus 125s to look at the computer. And you may be able to see that they're cut off at the bottom so she can look under them to use her bifocal for near tasks. Works really well. So with a little creativity, we can get over that intermediate problem. Of course, we have a lot of other designs with GP corneal lenses. We started way back with high eccentricity back surfaces that were fit 4 to 6 diopters steeper than the cornea. Of course, that had a problem in that it would commonly induce corneal changes, which led to spectacle blur. So we said, hey, we can change the manufacturing, use low eccentricity lenses. The key fitting tip here with low eccentricity lenses is commonly we'll need to have that upper lid attaching to the lens to help manipulate the lens. So when the patient looks down, they look through a more peripheral part of the lens, which there's a little added push and plus. And now, more recently, we have front surface aspheric design. So manufacturing today can do amazing things on both front and back surfaces of gas permeable corneal lenses. And some designs employ both surfaces being used to create the multifocal effect. So a lot of options there. The key nugget here is that we just need the lens to move and center properly. Just like soft lenses. They need to move and center properly. Some of us may feel a little insufficient at our ability to judge fluorescein patterns. I kind of don't care what the fluorescein pattern is if the lens is moving and centering well. The fluorescein pattern is helpful only when it's not doing what I want, and it helps inform me what change I need to make to get the lens to move and center well. So keep that in mind. Don't let nuances of fluorescein patterns stop you from fitting corneal GP lenses. Any other questions before we get into specifics on fitting simultaneous vision multifocals, which will include soft multifocals?
Tom, we do have a couple.
Okay.
So one is, and this I think relates to the earlier discussion, is that do you ever use either different ads from one eye to another, or different designs? For instance, a toric single vision lens in one eye and a multifocal in another.
Absolutely. Yes. As far as different ads, particularly as we start dealing with more advanced presbyopia, it's commonly very difficult to find that right balance. That's the word I keep in my head, is I'm trying to find the right balance so the patient can perform most of their tasks most of the time. And for the advanced presbyope, commonly that means a lower ad in one eye to enhance distance vision in that eye, and a stronger ad in the other eye to enhance near vision in that eye. And then with both eyes open, that right balance is struck. And as I alluded to earlier, there is a large portion of the population where there is astigmatism in only one eye, and I will commonly fit a toric lens on that eye and a multifocal on the other eye. Usually the toric lens will be for distance correction, because I want the multifocal to be biased for near and stretch out to the intermediate distance.
Excellent, excellent. You know, I would like to make a comment, if I could, Tom. You covered
Please.
The translating bifocals terrifically, and like you, I too am a very big fan of what they can deliver optically. And I often like to tell the story about Dr. Judy Peregrine, who is a professor at the University of Houston College of Optometry, where she enjoys fitting translating bifocal GPs in 48 to 55-year-olds. And her philosophy is, by starting them younger in those designs as they age, all one has to do is to change the ad power and not any of the adaptability or any of the other switchover kind of concerns that we might have relative to moving into a translating lens.
Craig, can I comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that approach, and in fact, I would encourage everyone to take that approach when they're fitting a soft multifocal. Commonly, what we've done in the past is we're in a hurry, we got 3 patients waiting for us, and we got a new presbyope, and they're wearing single vision soft lenses, and they're presenting with new symptoms of near visual blur. So what do we done? We push the plus in one eye, right? And that gets them taken care of really quickly. They come back the next year. We do the same thing. We do that for a number of years until they're in full-blown monovision. And now they've got problems with monovision, with glare at night or problems at arm's length or depth perception issues. Now we try to fit them with a multifocal now that they're a high ad patient. Fit them early on with the multifocal when it's an easy transition, when they're in a low ad situation. And then as you progress in presbyopia, as you said, you just make modifications and they don't have to go through that big adaptation process.
Okay, that is phenomenal advice. One last comment I'd like to make on the GP front before we move on. That Dr. Amy DiNardo had a study at Michigan College of Optometry that I was involved in, where they were going to compare the results of soft multifocals versus GP multifocals. And they wanted to recruit patients in both categories to see what their response would be. And they ultimately could not complete the study because they couldn't find enough of the GP presbyopia wearers that were dissatisfied with their lenses.
Wow.
So quite interesting.
So Craig, anytime, it's been a great practice builder for me that I've had patients that have sought me out because their previous provider wanted to switch them to soft lenses. Now that wasn't because of the comfort, for the betterment of the patient, it was for the comfort of the doctor.
Yeah.
So yeah, GP patients, boy, when they're happy, and most of them are, don't you dare take their lenses away.
Exactly. Tom, we have some additional questions, but you know what? We're going to put those off till the end. We will cover them. But I know you have some really important stuff you still want to cover this evening.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. So this is going to be tips for fitting simultaneous vision designs. And as I shared, it includes the soft lens option, but also hybrids and sclerals and many of the corneal GP multifocals. So these thoughts can be applied to all those. So I'm going to go cover a few things I probably don't need to say, but I'm going to say them anyway just to make sure it's complete. Obviously, we need to start with the detailed refraction. That's going to form the foundation upon which we're going to build this contact lens house. And what do I mean by detailed refraction? I mean a distance power that is no more minus than they absolutely need for clear vision. So we want clear vision far away, but if we're into that, which is better, 1 or 2, and they go, 2 is a little better. No, they don't get that, right? So no more minus than absolutely necessary, and conversely, no more add than absolutely necessary for near tasks. So the goal here is to minimize the difference between the distance and the near power, because the greater the distance, the more they compete with one another. So let's keep that as tight as we can so they live happily together, like these two cats. Okay. Determining eye dominance is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I think there's so much we don't recognize or pay attention to. Most of the people that I talk to, when we ask them about how you determine eye dominance, they use sighting dominance, like as shown here, where the person extends their arms, they line it up with some object, and then you figure out which eye they're lining that up with. That is how you're wired. It's like being right or left-handed. Well, there's been studies by Holden, Roboy, Erickson that show very little correlation between sighting dominance and success, both with multifocals and monovision. The other way to determine eye dominance, which is my preferred method, is sensory dominance. That is seeing how much plus, or which eye tolerates a little bit of blur better than the other eye. So we always talk about dominant eye, but really what I want to know is, what's the non-dominant eye? That eye is my friend. That eye I can get away with blurring a little bit and utilizing that eye for enhancing near vision. So blur the far a little bit, and it's acceptable to do that on that eye. If we look at some studies in the past, here's one by Pointer that looked at sighting versus sensory dominance. I want to cut right to the bottom here. There's really very low correlation between the two. So if there's low correlation between the two, and I have to pick one, I'm going to pick sensory dominance, because that's more like what we do when we fit a multifocal lens, when we have to push plus in front of one eye. That's what we're doing. There's a technique that I've been employing lately, and I call it the blur tolerance test. And how this works is you have the patient view an object through the best prescription. Usually I do this through the phoropter at my endpoint of my refraction. Both eyes are open, and I gradually add plus in front of one eye until the patient reports first blur. Then I put that plus power, put the minus power back in that eye. So now I'm starting where I was at the beginning. I repeat for the other eye, and I see which eye will take more plus, and that will help me determine which is the non-dominant or dominant eye. This graph shows you a series of patients that me and a couple of the colleagues in my office did, and you'll see here that for some, this is showing you the difference in the amount of plus that we accepted between the right and left eyes on the subjects that we saw. You can see most patients, it was a quarter diopter difference, very little difference. So in patients where there's no difference, a quarter diopter difference, and I would argue that it doesn't matter which eye you choose as being the dominant eye. Where there's those patients where, you know, there's a huge difference in the amount of plus that they'll accept, then that matters. Because some patients it does matter and some patients it doesn't matter. And I've been frustrated for years trying to figure out, How do I know which is which? And this blur tolerance test helps me. So if there's a very little difference between the amount of plus one eye takes versus the other eye, I choose which is the dominant eye based on other things. Like, for example, if they have astigmatism in one eye, if there's very little difference, I'm going to fit that astigmatic eye for distance viewing, even if it's the non-dominant eye. But if it's such a slight difference, the patient will do well. If on the other hand, if there's a huge difference in the amount of plus one eye accepts over the other, then I can't play that game. But I find that a really helpful tool. Okay, when it comes down to selecting the actual lenses to place on the patient's eye, follow the fitting guide. And I'll just share with you that when soft multifocal lenses first came widely available with the ABB bifocal, I had a chance to go around the country and talk to small groups about how to fit these. And I found that people that followed the fitting guide had much more success. Companies want you to be successful with their lenses. They learn the nuances of their designs, incorporate that into their fitting guide to help you be more successful. So there's many times in life where we need to be creative. This is one time where we can put the creativity aside to follow the fitting guide. Once we apply the lenses based on the fitting guide, how do we assess performance? And this is really important. This is getting back to that. Let's look at subjective performance versus objective performance, which is how well they read the acuity chart. That's important. We have to measure that, but that's not going to be the driver of my decision making. I'm going to apply lenses to patients, ask them to go out in the reception area for 10 minutes, come back, and then I walk in the room and say, how you doing? Very open-ended question. What that does is gives the patient a chance to now take the reins of the conversation and direct me to what needs to be tended to. So if they say problems with near vision, distance vision is fine, that's where I focus my efforts. If they say, I'm doing great, I'm saying, don't change much here, Tom, don't mess it up. When we do assess performance, we want to make sure we're doing it in a real world environment, and I would speculate most of you know this. You stay away from the phoropter, lights up. You want to mimic the scenario the patient exists in their regular daily life. A few key things that I found really helpful is when I'm assessing the patient performance, I do want to take their acuity for legal reasons and others. When they come into the examining lane, we have the 20/40 line isolated. Why the 20/40 line? Well, a couple reasons. One is in the state of Ohio, and I would guess in most states, legal driving, unrestricted driver's license is 20/40 acuity or better. So I want to check that box. But also, if you have the entire acuity chart projected, what's the patient going to do when they sit down? They're going to try to read the bottom line. They're going to try to read 20/15. And if they can't, they're going to be frustrated or discouraged. And it just sets this whole process off on the wrong foot. So start with 20/40. We're pretty sure, almost certain they're going to get that. Then go to 20/30. Oh, good. 20/25. Whoa. 20/20. Yeah. See how it makes it success after success and sets up a positive experience. Make sure you use text-based near tasks. Read paragraphs, not letters. People read paragraphs in cell phones in their real world. And then give it time. If a patient isn't performing as well as you'd like, but everything seems to be in line, give it time. There have been a number of studies that show time is a significant variable in how patients do with multifocal contact lenses. And I want to direct you to the bottom study there with Fernandez. Over 15 days, acuity with a multifocal lens improved. Not so with monovision. So time is our friend when it comes to adaptation to multifocal lenses. Now, some of you may say, well, presbyopes, their brain's hardwired. That's the old school thinking. Recent studies have shown that we still got it. We still got flexibility at the ripe old age that I am. So the presbyopic brain is still adaptable and can learn how to adapt to multifocal optics. If a lens isn't performing as well as you want, always start with a over refraction using loose lenses. Make sure you've nailed that distance power before you start changing bifocal power. Commonly with these aspheric designs we alluded to earlier, more plus will be accepted than what you would expect based on the spectacle prescription. So always offer that plus power, and oftentimes they'll take it. Once you've confirmed that, then start following the manufacturer's fitting guides on how to nuance the powers to enhance performance. And I want to close with this slide. When is enough enough? How many of you out there have been fitting a multifocal lens and had the patient back again and again and they're still not happy? When do you say, stop? Well, first of all, I want to make sure everyone's setting the right tone at the outset. And I employ what I call the sandwich approach, where you say something positive. For example, I know you've enjoyed your single vision soft lenses for many years. Now you're developing problems with your close vision. I have great news. We have a lens that can help you see far away and up close. And I throw in the meat. Now, there is a little bit of give and take. You may notice in a dimly lit restaurant, you may need some extra magnification or extra light. That's the meat. Then you finish up with a positive statement, but I believe I can meet most of your visual needs most of the time. And setting that sandwich, using that sandwich approach, a positive comment with the meat, followed by another positive comment, sets the right tone. So you do that first. And you've confirmed the prescription as I've just outlined, making sure that distance RX is on, and then follow the fitting guide. If they're still not happy, share the 3 revelations. The one that I always share that I said as part of my sandwich approach is the closing of the sandwich approach is my goal is to meet most of your visual needs most of the time. Implied in there is I'm not going to meet all your needs all the time, but I'm going to hopefully meet most of your needs most of the time. If they still come back unhappy, I share this. You may need to give up a little bit of crispness for freedom. And I find that helps some people get over the hump. And there's others that will still come back not quite satisfied, and I just have to sit back and say, I'm sorry, I've done my due diligence. This is as good as it gets. I've been surprised the number of times patients sit back and go, oh, okay, well, it's fine. I just thought if you can make it a little bit better, that'd be great. So I wanted to share those 3 revelations with you. It's been helpful for me in closing up wrap up the case, let's say. I hope those ideas are something that perhaps is new to you and that you can take and employ. And Craig, do you have any closing comments you want to make?
Well, I do. I want to turn this next section over to Arch Holcomb, though, if I can, for just a minute, from ABB Optical. Arches have just a couple of slides, and they may answer some of the questions we already have. And then I would like to have both Arch and yourself stay on. So I have a couple of questions I would like to be able to share with everybody. I'd like to introduce Arch Holcomb. For those of you that don't know him, Arch is a lead consultant for ABB Optical. He is, for me at least, a go-to person when I need to really have some help relative to how to fit or manage a contact lens wear, as well as the other consultants on his team. Arch, good evening. Thank you for joining us. And if you could share a couple of words of wisdom with us tonight.
A few words I may have, Greg. Thank you very much. And thank everybody for attending tonight. I thought this was absolutely wonderful. Just so informative and a lot to think about when we're fitting our patients and for us when we're consulting. Just a couple of words about some designs that we have. We have the Mandel Seamless. If you could go to the next slide. The Mandel Seamless, Bob Mandel's concentric translating bifocal. Again, much like the Natural Vision, which is our executive type or flat top. The Mandel is a concentric bifocal. The Extravision Tetra multifocal, this is a progressive. It comes in not only the Tetra, which is a front aspheric multifocal, but also in a version that's bi-aspheric. Spectre View, this is another design that is really intended for mature presbyopes. It has a defined distance and near portion, but also has a small intermediate portion. So it really benefits the mature presbyope. Our Natural Vision is our executive type flat top. The Tangent Streak comes in a couple of versions, one a translating and the other a no-line aspheric, with some different iterations that improve intermediate acuity with that. And lastly, the Renovation, which is Art Optical's multifocal lens. We have fitting sets for all of these lenses. We can loan them out. I'm old school, and I believe putting a lens on an eye, particularly with specialty lenses, not only multifocals, but with keratoconus, with pellucid, really helps us evaluate the fit of the lens and the tolerance of the patient a lot better. Next slide will show the consultants. There are 13 of us now. We have covered all the time zones in the U.S., east to west. Our consulting line is open from 8 a.m. until 9 p.m. Eastern time. So we cover most of the hours that everybody is open. A lot of experience here, not only in consulting, but in manufacturing, also in clinical efforts. One of our new consultants, Dee Reyes, was the clinical director for Synergize. So she brings with her a wealth of knowledge with that particular modality, both the multifocals that were mentioned. So Craig, if you could take it from here and wrap up and talk a little bit about the upcoming sessions that we have scheduled.
Absolutely, Arch. But before we actually move on, you can see in front of you, the audience, what is coming up next in this series sponsored by ABB Optical. Arch, I noticed that you did move relatively quickly through a slide that listed a number of lenses that are distributed by ABB besides the ones that you fabricate. And this goes to a question that we had from one of the audience members who wanted to know whether or not any lab can make translating GPs, or do you have to use a specific brand? Since ABB Optical carries so many, can you address that issue?
I think most labs can make translating bifocals. I think a lot of labs don't, because they feel that perhaps the multifocal idea, the progressive ability, the different powers, the progressive power is what people want. I always have asked the patient what they want, and I think Dr. Quinn spoke to that. We have to know the expectations of the patient before we can discuss the appropriate modality. So if you have a mature presbyope, 250 ad, you're probably not going to have a very happy patient if you use just one of the normal multifocal progressive designs. They just don't get the ad power that they want. That's where our Spectre View comes into play, or in some cases the Natural Vision, what's the executive type flat top. So we need to know the patient's needs before we can even talk about the appropriate modality.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Quinn, I'd like to ask you this, and then maybe if necessary, Arch could weigh in. You had mentioned before about ordering 3 toric multifocals per eye when you wanted to be able to bridge the different axes, for instance. Do you have any issue getting any credit back from the laboratory for those trials? Or were you talking more in terms of simple disposables?
That's a great question, Craig, and I'm curious to see what Art says about that, because my lead technician takes care of all that, so I'm not really sure what happens down in the weeds of that.
With our loaner type program, we charge a nominal fee for taking the lenses, cleaning them up, make sure they're appropriate for the next loan out. But that's all we really charge for. What we want to do is provide, like you said, in the case of the 3 toric multifocal lenses, we want to provide a range of lenses that people can put on the eye and really figure out if the patient's going to be happy with the modality. And we will go to just about any length we can to provide the widest range of parameters so that you can determine that while the patient's in your office.
So Archie, what you're making me realize is that when I order those 3 lenses per eye, I'm really ordering a mini fitting set that'll allow me to put the lenses on, evaluate, and make adjustments as seen fit.
Exactly, and that's what our fitting set loan program is really aimed at.
Okay, that is terrific, and I think to just weigh in also, if these are toric multifocal soft lenses, in many cases they can't do anything with them if they're opened, but if they're unopened, there may be the availability to get some kind of credit back from your fabricator of the lenses. Dr. Quinn, I'd just like to mention your closing slides talking about the actual management of the patient was terrific. I think that those items that you shared in what you called your 3 revelations are truly key in being able to manage the patients. And that last comment you made, at least in my experience, has been when you tell patients this is it, their biggest worry is you're going to take them away from them at that point.
Right.
And it's a very strong message. I know one other thing that I would often do is to tell the patient, we'll make one more change, but that's the end of it. And it planted the seed, and it had the same result as what you just said.
That's brilliant. I love that.
So I would like to, first of all, thank you, Dr. Quinn, for spending some time with us tonight. This was really quite interesting. This area of multifocal contact lens fitting remains a challenge. And I think it's an interesting challenge, though. And when we have patients that are successful, they remain successful for long periods of time. Arch Holcomb, I'd like to thank you very much for weighing in on what is happening at ABB Optical and the different types of designs that are available. Your consultant team is phenomenal. And I think that anytime anybody listening here has a question, getting on the line to those consultants from ABB Optical will be very beneficial. And from the standpoint of future presentations, in September, Dr. Clark Chang is going to talk about strategies for solving contact lens complications in both soft, corneal, and scleral contact lenses, followed by a real important area for all of us, that is the practice management tips, including billing and coding and other things that might help our specialty contact lens practice, by Dr. Stephanie Wu, who's knee-deep in the weeds with multiple practices trying to make this happen. Also, you will be contacted by ABB Optical in the next day or so. At that point, you will be notified where you can access the recording of tonight and the handout if you weren't able to bring it or to download it. Dr. Tom Quinn, thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.
Really spending time is fantastic. Arch Holcomb, Arch, thank you so much also for being available tonight. Thank you for the team in the background to make this webinar work. And thanks all of you for attending tonight. Bless you. Good night.
Good night.